Welcome back to another podcast episode, and today I want to introduce and welcome three amazing mums from our BackChat Mumma Village to the podcast. Carly, we've heard from Carly a little bit before. She's a teacher and a mum. She's got two big hats. Kathy is another one of our mums, and Mel, one of our Toowoomba mums, one of our out-of-towners, one of our out-of-town mums. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
To share your stories. So, ladies, what would you say if there's a mum at home at the moment who has a little one who's either obviously struggling with dysregulation, that physical form, or maybe it's that more emotional form where other people aren't seeing it and they're that little duck underwater who's paddling away. They're very connected to you. You know, the kind of littlies who always have to have one hand on you or be up against you at every time. What would you say to other mums out there listening today? What would you say about early identification? What would you say about treatment? What would you say about seeking help?
I think when you're going through a period like that, or a season as I like to call it, where you're exhausted and feel like you're in a bit of a pit, it's often not the first thing that comes to a mother's mind because we're always focusing on our family, but looking for ways to give yourself some self-care. And I don't mean that in a cliche kind of a way. And self-care will look different for all sorts of different people, but it's very difficult for you to keep the boat afloat in your family and navigate that season if you're running on empty. And I'll never forget, a doctor once said to me around when I was struggling with home life and navigating this with my young son, they said to me, "Look, Carly, you're running a marathon. This is not a sprint. There is no quick fix for you in this situation." And that was my time to tap into and find my village. I already had a huge circle of friends, but very few friends had a true insight into what was going to face.
Yeah, and that's finding that people that can relate to you, because so many people you tell your story to and they'll go, "Oh, my kid's like that," but they're not really.
No,
like
or they give you lots of pity.
Or as I say, they'll grow out of it. I'm like, no, they won't.
This is a lot
more.
Don't
get it.
This is a bit different to that.
And it is a marathon. Absolutely right, Carly. It's a huge marathon. It's not a quick fix.
No.
You know, people often say, especially with issues like, you know, when we talk about medication, conservative microdose, it's not a quick fix.
No.
You're just putting the little ones in a zone where they are ready to take on board the learning, whether it's the literacy, whether it's the motor speech planning, the motor coordinate, whatever it is, you're simply just helping them that little bit more. But it's a marathon. It's exhausting.
And it's teamwork too. And it was, being a teacher, I got on board and understood what needed to happen a lot faster than my husband, who's not in the education field by any way, shape or form. But I kept coming back to him and saying, hey, if it's not hurting him, it could be helping, it could be helping him. Yeah. Okay, let's just give this a go. And it's certainly been incredible meeting other families like Mel and her husband, and the dads having, and yourself and your husband having just normalizing the dad space and all the things that they face.
I can't wait to do the dads.
Yeah,
podcast in the next episode, because dads just are not people who talk about it.
No.
But, seeing them at the barbecues, having a beer, at the fishing days, having a beer and chatting and saying this is what it is. Yeah, little Billy's running around, has so much energy, but that's just him.
And as fathers of boys, these little boys of ours are going to be looking to their dads, for many years to come. So it's important that they get nurtured and cared for just as much as us. But that teamwork,
And definitely, I think trusting your gut as a mum, because there's a lot of information being flown at us. You should be doing this and you should be doing that, and if it's not sitting right in your gut, then go with that.
Absolutely.
And
persist,
advocate, because
and
at the end, advocate is the perfect thing, because the only one that really cares about your kid is you.
Yeah.
No matter what anyone else says, you're the one that's going to have to advocate and fight for them the whole time. So and in this path. It's not an easy path. It's a create your own adventure path where we have to try and figure out every single stage and step. So following your gut and just keep fighting. Don't give up because, like you've got amazing people like Owen at BackChat out there, and you just got to find that village. And once you have got it, tap into it, and you just find that hope that things can get better.
Yeah.
So,
we talk a lot about the rabbit hole in early intervention, in early identification about families, and there are families that you guys know who've gone down a rabbit hole, have come to see me when their little ones were 2 or 3, and then they left because they were a little bit confronted. You know, because I was saying things that other people weren't saying.
Yeah.
And it's hard to take on board, but they've come back after spending, some of them have spent years down a rabbit hole, and then they've come back going, oh my goodness, that was a clinical indicator of this.
Yeah.
So it is about mums listening to their gut,
Truly
finding
is.
people who will support them. Mel, you come from Toowoomba.
Yeah. And our journey has been really quite tough as well because, as Kathy said, there's no straight line as to what you're supposed to do when you have a child with, regulation difficulties. And so it's been really tough for us in Toowoomba. And it's also really hard to find providers in Toowoomba.
Oh, yeah.
The wait lists are just so big. And especially when you're first starting out and you realise there is something going on with your child, it's just scary. It really is. You just feel like you're all alone, which was really good. We found Owen. We attended her ADHD conference in Brisbane.
In Queensland. It was 3 years ago now we met.
And that was our first kind of delve into the whole world of this. And I just remember going up to Owen straight after she'd spoken, and I was just in tears, and I said, can you please help us? Like, I'm so lost. We don't know what we are supposed to do. This is happening. And she just said, message me and I'll contact you and I can help you. And since then, it's just been an amazing journey. Thank you so much.
It's okay. And we're all mums of boys here.
Yes.
So, none of us have girls. We're all mums of boys. So I think that puts a little bit of a different spin on our conversation too, because boys change. They're not, like I said in an earlier podcast, they're not the same at 2 as they are at 4 or 6, or when they develop literacy, things change again, things shift in their brain. It really is a marathon. It's not a quick fix.
Yeah, and there's not one approach either.
Absolutely
because at the
not.
same time, you've got to be focused on so many different aspects. You've got, boys are physical, so you've got to get the physical aspect, then you've got the mental aspect, then you've got the confidence, you've got all then the learning, and then and so you've got to try and figure out, like, while my focus might be on dysregulation, I've also at the same time got to be tackling the physical and mental and all these other aspects too. And so it is a full-on journey.
Even as a teacher, I didn't understand that there's this inattentive side to ADHD. I mean, in the media, it's all about, the energetic, sometimes even violent, side to ADHD. And it wasn't until I joined the BackChat clinic that I understood about the daydreamers and my son not being able to retain what he was learning, and that you can fluctuate between, so when my son's at a birthday party, he's overstimulated and he's over here and causing a ruckus, and but in the classroom, just looking out the window, and so it's, you just learn so much as well from other families when you're navigating that journey. I remember the first time Michael and I went to might have been a disability conference expo, probably quite similar sort of, and I don't know about you and Bill, but even just going to one of those events is just so overwhelming. And I remember Michael just sort of walking out of there and going, I never want to go to something like that again, because it's just so confronting. And there's just so, I mean, it's encouraging that there's a lot of support available out there, but it's just overwhelming where you even start. And we come from a tight Bayside community in Brisbane, and we're firm believers in being a part of our community. So it's just been fabulous to connect with local mums through the BackChat community, but then also having some families come from regional areas too. So
it's been lovely. In terms of looking at services in regional Queensland, Mel, because that's something which has certainly been in the news recently with that, that family in Bondi. Did you find it difficult in the early years to access help?
Definitely. I had a list of people I had to contact, and I would contact every single place, and they had waiting list upon waiting list upon waiting lists. I'm still waiting to hear back from the psychologist that I tried really hard to get Liam, my son, into, when he was 4.
Still.
So it's just hard. It's so hard.
So even if you want the help, it's hard to get.
Hard to get.
Yeah.
And then I have noticed there's been quite, like, there's new people starting, but they're straight out of university. And so that also makes it hard because they don't have the experience that the others do have. And I'm sure they'll get that. But when you've
got no time to waste when they're little.
Early intervention is just so important. And so you need to find the
window.
You need to find the right therapist
that big picture
and who
has that pathway straight ahead. I know how it's going to look
for
the next few years and what we may need to do to get this little one learning.
That's right.
And ready.
And that's the thing, like for Hudson, he had a speech issue. Now, when we first identified it, he was very young. So we took him to a speech therapy. That was a thought. We thought, wait, that's the approach I've got to go. But for him, going to speech therapy that young, it's too intense. He couldn't even keep his concentration for more than, a couple of minutes. And I'm like, well, how is he going to sit there and say, but for half an hour? So it wasn't until I went to Ullman and she explained, I actually you have to build up their
executive function. Executive function. We started at that joint attention level.
Absolutely. And I'm like, I didn't even think about that. So
and that's something we see a lot. Little ones who come in who've done years of speech therapy, but they don't necessarily have those executive function skills to be able, joint attention, a bit of sustained attention to be able to then work on speech.
On the
similar for little ones with reading. A lot of children who are struggling with reading do not have base level joint attention or sustained attention to be able to read
and apply the skills.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's why people should not be scared of medication either, because it was just life-changing for our two sons. Absolutely life-changing.
And it can be done so well nowadays. I remember when Jake was so much younger and we had a fantastic paediatrician. We were so lucky. And I'm just so thankful for him and the way he explained it, the way he talked it through with me. He was amazing, and I wish more people were like that nowadays. I wish more specialists were like that. I wish more specialists had his experience, his knowledge. He was really up to date with everything. He was talking about combination treatments that specialists nowadays are not even talking about, are not aware of. And that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about all these waiting lists. I'm wondering about all these kids on waiting lists. I don't know. My thoughts are we should be doing more research and more investigation into, those treatments for our kids who have those severe difficulties.
Especially when it's so time you have to get onto it time sensitive. You have to get onto it so quickly, especially when they get to school, because as soon as they start to get behind, it's so hard to get them to catch up.
Yeah. I've noticed if children haven't sort of had that diagnostic clarification by year 2, the trajectory from year 3 onwards, kids will really struggle if they haven't had that intervention by then. Yeah, it's a real pattern.
It is. I've got a couple of grade 3s at the moment, and we are working really hard to build their literacy function.
And then it's harder for the parents, and they'll have to work harder if the longer it gets delayed. Yeah,
it's harder to maintain. Now, talking about jobs and holding down occupations and working while we're caring for our little ones, how is that going with everybody?
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy you've made some big changes in your life.
I was privileged enough to have 2 years off, but was not sustainable, unfortunately. And so I have just recently gone back to work full time.
And that's cost of living?
That's cost of living, I was just going backwards,
backwards,
not meeting payments. So you have to go back. And so for us, it's been a massive change, and for the kids too, because now we're going to try and coordinate, because a lot of the therapists too, they've got their families to go home to in the afternoon. So a lot of them work school hours, Monday to Friday. So if you're working full time, how do you get your kids to?
And if the schools don't allow therapists on site,
correct, and some can't because they're so busy too.
Yeah,
they have back-to-back appointments, so they can't even leave their
experienced therapists. A lot of them do not actually leave their clinic because people will travel from everywhere to come and see them.
So they can't even get out.
Yeah.
So and so it's about trying to coordinate. Okay, well, am I going to do this run? You're going to do this run. Thankfully, I've got grandparents that I've called on, but if you don't have that, I don't even know how you'd survive it because
you need those support networks.
You do, and just at that whole coordination is very, very hard. But at the end of the day, you just got to suck it up. Like, I know it's hard, but you just I think, gosh, if I didn't have Olwen and the support and other OTs and everyone else around me, it would be a completely different story to where I'm at now. So. It's tough.
Makes the sacrifice of those 2 years worth it,
and lack of sleep and everything else.
And it's just the exhaustion, isn't it? The constant exhaustion.
And you sort of mentioned before, it's not a sprint; it's a marathon. But at the very beginning of the journey, I remember every time I'd go, I'm like, it's only going to be 6 months. I'm going to be here. It's only going to be, and then I'm like, got to hit the 6 month, and I'm like, oh my goodness,
so
I'm still
here.
Go.
Yeah,
it'll only be a year. Yeah, but then I'm like, it'll only be a year. So I think almost that in a way that helped because I wasn't thinking this is going to be a lifetime, and hopefully it won't be. But just thinking, let's just take those small steps and just get through the next few months and then the next, and
And do you think that's that grieving process too?
It is.
Absolutely. I grieved my career when we had that the kindy year where Thomas hit rock bottom. I hit rock bottom too because he was on the verge of being excluded from kindy unless we dropped him back to a 3-day week, and I was working 5 days in a leadership position. I've worked my whole career to get to that level of leadership, and I'm getting daily calls from kindy, and having to leave work. I mean, it's bad enough being in kindy with all the germs and sick leave you got to take for that.
That's right.
Yeah, let alone your child who's severely dysregulated. And so I had to drop back to a 4-day week and then rely on a grandparent on the 5th day, and that was hard for Thomas too. I mean, he was missing out on social experiences and things of being in kindy, and
would have been well aware too. That's something I say, but these little kids, they're well aware of how much they're struggling. Like
they
we
are.
pretend, this whole neuro-affirming approach is totally missing the point that the children are so aware of their struggles.
They know they're different.
And that causes huge mental health unless you address it. And for children with severe regulation, really address it. And that's something I think we're totally missing the boat on, and that's something that comes through, I think, with experienced therapists. Many of us know a lot of experienced therapists, who we've worked with in our journeys, and they totally agree that we are missing a big part of that neuro-affirming conversation. I think you can look at seeking conservative medical treatment for kiddies and still be neuro-affirming.
Yeah, and I know in the early days when Thomas was receiving some psychology support, having that growth, teaching him about having that growth mindset, and that, ADHD can be his superpower too, and enables him to achieve so many things as well. So, that's been, and just normalising talking about the labels with family and friends, because it was a grieving journey for for the grandparents, for the aunties and uncles, and everyone. Classic will just sort of say, "Oh, but it's just Tom. He doesn't need to be medicated. That's just Tom." But I'll never forget one Mother's Day in a park. Tom he had such a huge meltdown. I was so embarrassed. I asked my dad to lock him in the car because I just couldn't contain him. And I knew then that, hey, this is not what Mother's Day is supposed to be like in a park with with your covers, with your cousins and your family, and people in the public, looking on. And from that moment on, I'm like, nah, this is something we need to step it up here. Yeah, we need to consider some conservative medication and never look back.
Specialist level help. How did everyone feel with the events in Bondi when you saw his family on the news, when you saw his parents on the news, his dad, his mum? They sought help decades ago. Nobody was talking about this. It'd
be every parent's worst nightmare to, I dare say, without knowing too much of the story, I'd imagine they probably worked really hard, and he was, medicated and probably treated as a younger boy, but heading into adulthood, I'd hate to imagine my son having the capacity for, that sort of violence. And that could have been, that could be my Thomas if I hadn't nipped it in the bud in the early years. So it makes me wonder, what sort of support that transition for children, from that sort of teenagers where they're still closely looked after and monitored in schools, what that transition to adulthood must look. How did he go missing in the how did he fly off someone's radar to get
particularly in the private sector?
Well, that's right. Like, do they have checks that keep going on them?
And I think it depends on the function when they hit that 18 years of age. It depends on what their function is. I know lots of children I've worked with over the decades who have gone to university and have struggled and have asked to be put back on their medication. Even Jake, with his intensive studies he's doing at the moment, he has asked 3 days a week if he can go back on it part-time because despite the fact that he exercises all the time, so is getting all of those natural endorphins, he is not able to focus enough on the nuances of the high-level text and the language load of the text that he's reading. And I'm like, well done, Jake. Well done to you for identifying that, for speaking out, talking to us about it and going, I think I need some help with this, not behaviourally, but it's for that attention. And I think that's what we need to talk about with our children. And I always talk to him about that when he was younger, about the fact that this is just something to help you, to build your brain. We were fortunate again to have an amazing paediatrician who that's how he spoke. And that's what I've done in my clinic. I think I've tried to go, this is just what we do. We play, we sing, we dance, we run, we throw balls, we talk. And for some children, their journey involves this treatment conservatively, and it's a really positive thing.
That's right.
And I love it that the children, I was saying to this mum this morning who was crying on the phone to me, and she said, I can't wait for my son to come and join your workshops. And I said, they're beautiful. The children are beautiful. And the reason why is because they're so accepting, because so many of them haven't been accepted themselves. So someone can have a full-blown meltdown and it's like, that's
totally
okay.
Right.
It's like,
That's the best thing about it,
that
too.
is the best thing about
That
it.
is.
And I think we're instilling in our own children such high knowledge about mental health illnesses and
listening to your body.
Exactly. But also empathy. They're learning empathy towards others at such a young age and acceptance, which is so important, which is something I've taught my boys, these people are, people are not well. These people on the news are not well and they're not fortunate. They haven't been able to access help and services and things like that. Another question I have for you mums, because you are experts, you really are. You're all talking to people. Mel, you're always coming in with conversations you're having with people in Toowoomba. Carly, you're in schools talking to people everywhere. Kathy, you do as well. What do you think we need to do to fix the disadvantaged crisis that we have here in Queensland, Australia? Youths, teens, what would be one thing each of you would recommend?
For me, I would be recommending for early intervention and access to sport for kids.
So the government, I'm going to be devil's advocate here, the government will say, we have early intervention, we have the health system, and we also have NDIS.
Yeah, but so I personally see that sport is another avenue for these little kiddies to build confidence
100%.
outside, because they're in a classroom, they may not be succeeding, but that doesn't mean to say they can't succeed in other areas. And if you can build their confidence and their ability to work out teamwork, problem solving, like sport creates so many skills that are transferable into everyday life.
Absolutely.
And it's expensive.
It's expensive.
It's so expensive. And so many parents are cutting it out because of the expense.
Expense, exactly it. And so it has to be looked at as how do we get and instead of getting kids roaming the streets on a sad day, and they'll be at a sports field playing sport, and they'll be building their own little village, their friends, and talking and
positively and constructively, not at the local skate
They're all
park.
gaming now. I'm shocked when I
exactly.
ask kids on a Friday during lunch break, what are you guys
What
up
are you
to
doing
this
for the
weekend?
weekend?
What sport are you playing? Just assuming that they all have some sort of club sport. Oh no, staying at home. I said, what are you doing at home? That must be so boring. Oh, we're gaming.
I've heard of gaming clubs in the morning before school starting at 5 a.m. little
Yeah.
kids, little boys.
I mean, I don't think we can get away from it. There's going to be gaming. It's the future
there
we're
is.
going into.
Yeah.
But it's
Going to make sport accessible, though.
It's moderation and having a blend and knowing that kids too have a lot of pent up physical energy,
Yeah,
right?
they do.
Can't sit in a
Especially
chair
boys.
all day long. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just not viable. So they have to be out moving, and that's part of the motor planning, right? So for Huddy, it was a lot of
brain generation as well.
the motor
brain.
planning was a big thing, and Olwen said when I first met her, Huddy has a motor planning issue. Connecting all those neurons is going to be difficult. You need to expose him to as many different things as
This
possible.
family took him mountain climbing
Oh,
Yeah.
the week
wow.
I met him. They came back the next week and said, we climbed Mount Coolum last week. I went, wow, this is a family I want to work with.
We'll do anything and
Amazing.
absolutely everything,
Yeah.
and it's from the musical aspect. We took him to drum lessons. We'll take him to anything and everything. But it's those, a lot of kids are not fortunate to get that exposure.
It's a privilege these days.
It's a
isn't it?
privilege, and it's a really
It's
really
expensive.
sad.
And so that's why we need to do something about funding for these sports and getting kids everywhere instead of being at home alone or in shopping malls running amok or somewhere else. They should be on any sport. I don't care if it could be an art class or something. I don't know, but it
Absolutely.
has to be something where it's got a little community around them, and it has to be accessible for all.
Yeah.
That's right. What do you think, Carly? What's your...
Well, my passion probably lies in the school setting, and I'd love to see all teachers given some trauma-aware practices, some development, some professional development in that space. Teachers by nature want to do their best to support all the learners in their class.
Absolutely.
But even I have learnt so much to enhance my teaching practice from participating alongside Thomas in his clinics sessions with you, with all the brain breaks and the movement breaks and just all these things that are really easily able to be built into the school day. But we've still got a long way to go for that to be normal practice. And teachers having that awareness, because a lot of teachers will come from privileged backgrounds themselves, and we work with just the hugest diversity in the state school system. And so I've been fortunate to have attended some really great professional development in trauma awareness for teaching, but that comes at a great cost to schools. So I'd love to see that sort of funded and more people on the ground in schools, more ability to have students connected to people other than their classroom teacher. We always talk to children about being able to name 5, safe adults. Some kids are flat out going beyond their teacher.
Aren't they?
Yeah.
Just really sad.
And leadership teams are really worn out being that for everybody. Leadership are looking after the teacher's well-being and things as well. So having more, whether it be chaplains or social workers on the ground supporting students. So definitely more human resourcing in schools.
Mel, what are your thoughts?
I just remember when we first started looking into the process, it was really hard to try and find someone or find the answers on what to do. So I think there needs to be more people that can help us with that as well, to navigate navigate the process, and also more people on the ground helping with it. So, when we were trying to get into speech therapy in Toowoomba, it did take months. This was at the public system as well. And then it took months, and then the waiting list was just so big. And then when we got there, we only had like a certain number of sessions. And then they were done because he turned 5. We then had to stop. So you couldn't even follow it up after they were 5. Even if you were mid going through your plan, it was done once they turned 5, which was really hard for,
That's really
everything,
hard,
because
isn't
you
it?
built this rapport with this person and
You'd waited so
waited so
long to get in.
Waited so long, and that the time's coming, and they turned 5, and literally on the day we turned 5, they were like,
And I don't know about you, but I felt like I used to get so angry. I'm like, how can you decide on that side of the phone that my son doesn't deserve any more help?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
Like I used to get so, I'm like, no, we need help.
Yeah.
And it's like these people just sit there and just go, no,
We can't
you
do
don't
it.
meet,
They're the
you
rules.
don't meet this criteria.
Exactly.
Sorry, the criteria's
Even
straight.
though we've told you the life story, it's just such a toll on us every time we have to tell the whole,
whole story again, yes.
It's so...
Provide all the documentation, spend hundreds of dollars on reports. Oh my gosh.
Before you have any funding, all the money on everything,
If people are disadvantaged, how are they going to be able to afford to spend all that money on
And
reporting?
you feel like saying, just come spend a day with my kid.
Exactly.
And then you tell me.
Yeah.
But
That they're fine and that they don't need that. And then you've got to go on another waiting list because they've turned 5. See ya. But I think definitely they need more funding.
Do you think the school curriculum
yes.
as well
Yes.
needs to shift with the current student population that we have? Do you think our school curriculum is not take a disadvantaged area, maybe not areas in some schools where our children go, but maybe areas where there is extreme disadvantage? Do you think the school curriculum needs to be adjusted to fit with children who are living in extremely impoverished homes? Like you were saying, Carly, where you were talking about maybe we need a new sector of schools where disadvantaged little ones can go.
Or just more staff.
It's tough because, we've got 24 kids in a class and they're ranging in completely different levels of ability and exposure and privilege and everything else, and racial.
Absolutely.
Everything's different in that 24 kids. And speaking from my own personal experience, when I had ADHD as a kid, I was lucky enough to get put into a specialist classroom within a normal school. It was 12 kids, and they gave us the skill sets and the support that we needed.
Yes.
But I kind of find, and I'm going a bit off tap here, but, we try to be so inclusive in a classroom. We've got to but is that to the detriment of
That's
everyone in the classroom?
in schools.
Right?
It's such a hot topic everywhere,
It's a
isn't
massive
it?
way, like the high kids that are excelling and they just stuck there, which then they become troublesome because they're bored.
Yes.
You've got the low kids that are not getting the support they need. So it's not really it's a very hard environment to be inclusive. And I think
especially when there's one person there to do that. How are they supposed to manage all of that?
Often
the teacher
no teacher
aid.
aid.
Or
so
one teacher
are we
aid,
sort of
half
setting them up for failure at the same time? So I think that sort of needs to be reviewed. It can be in the same public school, but we need to look down and maybe break down, okay, these kids need more care. Can we? And that's when more funding, more teachers.
Yes,
these guys go into a separate little classroom.
Those human resources you were talking about, instead of these $5 million, I keep seeing these sports hall that are being built, and I'm like,
terrible.
My goodness.
And it's a vicious circle
ones.
too, because if the teachers are dropping, I was just reading in the news the other day about, I think we're losing something like 60% of teachers, and they're only being able to, backfill, not even half of that. So we're losing all these teachers because of their working conditions, because
you couldn't pay me enough to be a teacher.
Yeah, they are frontline workers.
My husband and my husband's a frontline worker. We were talking the other night and we were saying teachers are now frontline workers in our schools, in a lot of our schools. They're feeding children, they're bringing stationery, organising uniforms, shoes. I've heard of teachers, my goodness, the things teachers are doing. They're basically frontline workers, yet we're not valuing them. We're really not. And we're not valuing education.
No.
And we're not empowering teachers, either. I was talking to a principal the other day who works out Ipswich way in a low socioeconomic school, and he said something like he does about 20 records of when teachers are subjected to physical abuse, physical violence, like having to. So teachers are putting up with violence. They're putting up with bad
Some
language.
of the language I'm hearing that teachers are experiencing.
And they're not supported, so when they do, it's like they've got no comeback.
Lots of restrictive, restrictions in what we're able to do behaviour-wise. And if we haven't got buy-in from the parents, then
absolutely
hopeless. Yeah.
It's really difficult because then there's nowhere for those kids to go because, teachers say to me, we can't send them home. No one will be at home for this
limits on
this 4-year-old will go home
Yeah.
to no one at home. We cannot. Our duty of care is to these kiddies. We can't send this child home who's done A, B and C because no one will be there to look after that child, and that is scary.
Turning into an evil circle, isn't it?
is.
Just how do you break this cycle? And it's hard.
Does anyone worry about the next 10 years or, say, 20 years down the track when our children are all grown up and are adults here in Queensland, adult males in Queensland who've been looked after, cared for, connected with huge amounts of sport, music, reading, they'll be literate. Does anyone think ahead to the future and wonder? Or are you just hopeful for now?
I'm hopeful.
Hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see, at the end of the day, I just really love to see Thomas being an active member of his community and have the ability to live independently.
Learning or earning.
Yeah, learning. Yeah, learning or earning. Yeah, and just be able to, love whatever job he ends up doing and have a decent friendship circle around him. You know, that's sort of, I think,
And be happy.
all your hope.
Be happy.
for.
Just be happy as well.
And what about the kids that are falling through the cracks now who will be adults
It's a bit
then?
scary. It's very scary.
If they don't act, like the problem is like they'll go through a process and they'll go, well, we've identified we've got an issue, and then let's run a few case studies and we'll run this could take years. We haven't got years,
No, we don't.
and that's the silly thing. Like they just need to act now, and whatever happens to our kids who are in the kids now are going to be the juveniles. So if we can't fix the kids there in the school right now, we're going to have another
round.
It's already,
of having their own
additional.
children.
It won't even be another round. It will be an additional.
Yeah.
And the knife violence,
So
I
they
think,
almost
is going to be a really big issue.
They just need to just stop with all the, I don't know what you call it, but red tape, and just act now.
And disbanding these groups that they're starting, this youth crime commission that started and now it's been disbanded. It cost a couple of $100,000 to start. It's just been disbanded, like the waste.
Waste of money.
And they keep on saying, it's the focus at the moment is the youth crime and that teenager group. And I think that's fair enough what's going on.
But they also need to
they have
focus
to start future planning.
early intervention for the ones that are coming through.
So they can't just put them in prison or like open juveniles earlier to capture them now. That's not going to be the fix.
Detention centres, that's not the answer.
That's not the answer.
Because I even read an article the other day that said the children in detention centres are getting half as much schooling as children in mainstream school. My goodness. And those children.
I think the place to start is really schools, because I'm sure that's the place every child has to go to.
Absolutely, it's mandatory.
And that's the place that they can have all these support people be there, working at supporting hubs at the schools, and they can be identified, prep.
And working with the parents too, giving them, upskilling them with some parenting.
Yes.
I've been fortunate to work in some schools where the guidance officer might run like triple P parenting courses or circle of security, but they're probably, few and far between schools that do that, but having that in every school.
Because there's a lot of pressure to put on schools.
It is.
But they need that funding, and then it won't make it. If they have the funding,
it won't it on the schools. We're saying to the government, you need to step up.
Yes.
You have a social
and it's also and the training of teachers, and I'm sure it's there because I don't know. I'm talking about school, but having specialty teachers training, that have knowledge on how to deal with these different kiddies.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. I think QUT is the first university to have integrated trauma-aware practices in their Bachelor of Education. So it's starting to come through. I know when I went to uni over 20 years ago, we did one subject across the 4 years in special needs, catering for special needs. And that certainly, and I started my career in a special school, and that certainly did not set me up for the reality of working in that sort of a setting. So there's a lot to be said for having those inclusive practices and trauma-informed practices in teacher college. Yeah.
And the same goes for my degree.
Yeah, true. Yeah, absolutely.
Up, and yet speech pathologists, OTs, mainly speech pathologists and OTs are parents' first port of call when something is wrong with the child. We are the first port of call. GPs refer to us all of the time. So if we're not identifying these issues, who will? Really?
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Because you could have an inattentive ADHD kid. Their behaviour is perfect.
Impeccable.
They're just getting left behind.
They're just flying under the radar now.
The school's not going to raise them because right now they're not causing us an issue. I have these other kids that I have to focus on.
That's right.
So it's, we need that other aspect to
identify,
the ones
be able to identify.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you for your time, ladies. It's been really wonderful to hear your thoughts and opinions. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Olwen. If you know somebody who needs to hear this episode today, please share it with them. Until next time,